Okay, I think we are live now. Good afternoon, everyone. Sophia Towns here with the Low Country Autism Foundation. We are doing our Facebook Live community conversations. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a really special topic, a great topic, and that is processing the autism diagnosis when your child or loved one has just been diagnosed. How do you process that as a parent, as a caregiver? And we have my special guest here, Leslie Slemmons, who is a licensed clinical social worker, a counselor, and she is here in Bluffton, South Carolina, as am I. And she is going to present on this topic. And Leslie has a lot of experience in counseling families who are touched by autism, especially parents and caregivers. So she's really amazing to talk about the subject. So I'm going to turn it over to her in a second, but please, if you guys have any questions, any comments, please post them in the comment section. We have staff watching over the comments, and then we will be able to ask those questions directly to Leslie. So don't be shy, speak up. But thanks for joining us. And Leslie, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sophia. And thanks to everyone who is here right now. And for those of you that are going to catch this later, it's always an honor to be here and to be in this space with you all. And so thank you so much for just inviting me into this community. So so I'll just kind of, I guess, share some information, and then, Sophia, if there are questions, that guide our conversation, we can definitely head in that direction. Or if there's any questions that come in through the comments, that can kind of guide what specifically is meaningful for the community that is here in this space. My name is Leslie Slemmons, and like Sophia said, I am a licensed clinical social worker. I've been practicing for about 15 years, and a good chunk of my experience has been in the nonprofit world. I've spent a lot of time working with I would say probably from like junior high and above, so junior high all the way through adulthood, of neurotypical, neurodiverse communities, and absolutely those that have been touched by autism has been a lot of what my focus has been. And so, so processing the diagnosis of autism. So I want to start off by first saying that no professional, no family member, no other community member should ever tell you how to process. So I want to start off with that, because it's important to remember that everybody processes things in a very unique way, just like every human is unique and every relationship is unique. So therefore, the way that you process any of this aspect is going to be unique to your own personal experience. And so my hope is that as I kind of give some resources today, it's not to tell you what you should and should not do, but it's an offering that if these resources are helpful for you to almost validate what you're going through, then use it. But if it, makes you feel like you need to change the way that you are personally experiencing what's happening, then it might not be as helpful. So, So first of all, with the autism diagnosis, it's also important to name why everyone's process is so unique, is because especially caregivers could be finding out the information at different points of their child or adult's life, right? So we have some families who maybe are learning that their child has that diagnosis when the child is very young, so toddler or pre-toddler. And then we've also got, some families who aren't learning it until adulthood or later on. And so obviously that is going to change a little bit of how you process that, because there's more history there. There's just a different type of development that's going to happen. And so I think a common thread that I have heard through some of the families that I've worked with and in some of the experiences that I've noticed through the caregivers, is that when they are going through the process, in the beginning of the, there's obviously a lot of questioning. And so I think that is very common that when it first happens, where, so I think there's also the process that happens before medical providers get into the picture, right? So there's often that process of like you're just starting to notice some things that might seem a little bit different to you in regards to development or what you're noticing with your own child or adult. And then medical providers get connected as a resource, right? So there's definitely that transition and that difference. And one of the things that I really notice that I try to validate when I'm working with caregivers is that when I hear them talk about their own experience, it often feels like grief. And so I want to kind of change, or I guess broaden that definition, because sometimes when people hear grief, they automatically think that means death, right? When we hear grief, we think that that is that a significant type of loss where there is a death. However, I follow the larger, broader aspect of grief, which is the idea that grief is very much a normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. And so I've noticed that sometimes this process is very related to grief is because often parents have to go through the emotional response of noticing that there were certain expectations that they have had for their child. And now with that diagnosis, there now is a shift in what those expectations might look like or feel like. And so the process of grief could be helpful in helping to validate that experience of knowing that what you thought would be might not no longer be. And that doesn't mean it's good or bad, it's just going to be different. And working through all of the feelings that come with grief is an important, I think, a very important process to a caregiver in working through that diagnosis. So, yeah, so I'm just going to pause right there, and then I have some other resources, but I know that that kind of could be a lot of information. So I'll just open it up if there's any questions that come through. If there's, I'm really open to, like, if some people feel like, no, that, doesn't feel like grief, it feels like something else. That again is just coming from some of the relationships that I've had with caregivers who have had to go through this process.
Definitely. I know for myself, it was, I did feel this overwhelming bit of sadness that I tried not to allow myself to feel, because the day of the diagnosis for both of my boys, I was handed a big stack of papers. I'm in the car on the way back home, 2 hours from the Medical University of South Carolina. And I'm just trying to figure it out. And it's almost like, okay, well, I'm on this, just this movement to figure it out, to come up with a plan, to line every therapy up within that week, to start therapy the following week, to just get it going, boom, 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 boom. And, and then I found myself just having emotional, I won't say breakdowns, but just overwhelming sadness. And I think what it ended up being was, you do have high hopes for your child. And that doesn't mean you can no longer hope, but I think you do. I think every family, every parent dreams of when they're pregnant. You have these dreams of my child is gonna go to college and do well and do these amazing things and or he or she is going to be an amazing athlete. Um, and so it just starts to look different. Um, and there was a time period that I went through that I just had to deal with that. I'm still dealing with it, but I think I can definitely identify with that grief cycle that you were bringing up. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course that would make sense, right? Like kind of what you are naming, Sophia, is that like there's these internal expectations, but then there are very much external expectations, right? We live in a culture where there are cultural stigmas and expectations put out there about what what people should be doing, right? So there's an expectation that people should go to college and people should have successful careers, and people should have success in schools. And so yeah, I think you're hitting not only those internal expectations, but then the reality of like those external expectations about about that, and just kind of knowing that there might be difficulties in certain areas, whether that's education or even farther down the line. So yeah, you're hitting all of those things, which is extremely overwhelming.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just with the diagnosis itself is overwhelming to hear, that your child has this diagnosis. But then when you're basically just sent home with this packet, some families I've spoken with, they didn't get anything, depending on where they received their diagnosis from. And so then you just go into research mode, just getting on the computer, tracking down other families that have a child, a loved one with autism. And I think you're just in this full throttle, at least for me, it was just this full throttle. I got to find it out. I need to find out the answer. I need to find out what helps. How's he going to be supported? And it's just, you are just going 1,000 miles an hour nonstop, which I think to an extent, and stop me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but I also think going 1,000 miles an hour, trying to do all these things for your child, may be a way of not allowing yourself to process exactly what's going on. Work. I have one of my best friends and we have this kind of inside joke when we're getting upset or we have to say goodbye or something. We'll just say, oh, work, goodbye, see ya. Yeah, I'll see you later, goodbye. Work. And we just work through it, push through it, so go ahead.
Yeah, right. And isn't that interesting that like it's like almost our minds and our bodies are going into this maybe like this crisis survival mode, because and honestly you probably have to, right? There is a lot of logistics. And so that makes sense, right? That part of you is like, okay, we just gotta, we gotta line some things up. And so, however, it does sound like that is crisis mode, right? Like we just got to kind of, figure out what do we need for right now? What do we need to do? And so in the beginning, right, that would make a lot of sense that maybe that's what you're experiencing. However, yeah, if that continues, then you're right. Then you are blocking, you could be blocking yourself from some of that emotional experience, which then it's going to just get stuck. And that's kind of also my hope from today, is that talking through processing some of this emotion would help caregivers to not get stuck. Because when we get stuck, then we're blocked off from experiencing certain emotions. And therefore, we're blocking ourselves off from like accessing everything we need to make the best decisions for ourselves and for our kids in the future, right? Because we're not going to be seeing clearly. We're going to be seeing through some of our stuckness. So absolutely. So yeah, why don't we, so let me go into just a little bit deeper level of when I'm talking about the grief cycle. So the popular grief cycle that's really known is through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kelser. And so they did some research and came up with there's 5 main points that they did in the grief cycle, which is denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. So that's very helpful to see that, the grief cycle there's different areas to it. However, their research was specifically about loss and death. And so now there's more, theories out there that kind of broadens that model. And so I'm going to show you guys one that I think is more helpful for what we're specifically talking about today. So I'm going to just share my screen so you can see it. All right, so the stages of grief in my experience. Sophia, can you see that picture? Okay, so I'll start to the left. So not looking at all of those lines, but over on the left, you'll see there, it's called the stages of grief. And so you can see there's a lot more than 5 here. And so starting all the way on the left, what's being labeled here is the process starts with there's some loss or hurt that's experienced. So again, reminding ourselves that grief is a natural and normal reaction to loss of any kind. So if we are having to experience something where what we thought is no longer what it is, then obviously that creates a hurt within our hearts. And so that first stage is shock, right? So if we go from shock into numbness, sometimes that makes us go into kind of that absolutely like that action mode. So we're just gonna, that could be numbing, right? Using work or using other things so that we don't have to feel is what numbness is, right? It's preventing something from being felt within us. So the first stage is obviously that shock and numbness, and then denial is where we try to do everything to prevent it from happening, right? And so, so again, it might not necessarily, we're not preventing the diagnosis from happening. We're not preventing our child from, knowing that they have this diagnosis, but we're denying ourselves the ability to feel what that actually means for us as parents, right? So that is where that denial can be. And then we can go into emotional outbursts, where sometimes we feel like our emotions are out of control, we can't get a handle on them. And then there's the anger and fear. So fear is obviously very much related to worry. So that could be like projecting things into the future, worried about what that might mean for the long term for your child or adult. And then we go into searchings. So searching is trying to find an answer, like, why did this happen? Sometimes blame can be associated with that. So blaming yourself as a parent, like, did I do something wrong? Like, did this come from me? So that's, what searchings means. And then disorganization is just feeling like there are no answers. And so almost feeling some type of, there's some inner chaos. And then there could be panic. And so then at the very low part, we see that then there's a sense of loneliness, which associates with guilt and isolation. So into that feeling and thinking of like, no one can help me through this. And so, I'm alone in this experience. And so that can move into depression. And then as we start to move up the curve on the right, there's the re-entry troubles. So trying to get people to understand what your experience is, and then maybe not feeling like they're understanding what you're experiencing. And then we start to develop new relationships. So finding people that you do feel some type of connection with, who understand your own process, and then developing some new strengths of what this means for yourself as a parent. So right, this is where we go into new patterns and hope. So really kind of taking this loss and moving it into some type of newness of what this means for you as a parent or caregiver. And then after hope is affirmation, and then helping others. So moving kind of outside of yourself to allowing, the larger community some support, And then the top of it, of the loss, is adjustment. And why I really love this is because it doesn't go to acceptance, which is what the other model did. Because at the end of the day, I think it's okay. Like, you don't have to fully accept it, but can you adjust to what this really means? Um, so that is those stages of grief. And then moving to the other side is what the experience is, which is so true. It's not like you go from all, like, it's not like this beautiful curve that you just are going to go through each stage and you're going to know what you want. I mean, it is going to be going back and forth. And, sometimes you're going to move into strengths, and then you are going to move back into anger. So it really is like all of those scribbles that I think the true experience of it is that it's not this like projection of we're headed in this straight line. It's that there's a lot of things that happen, and even when you reach adjustment or you're helping others, you might still also experience denial and emotional outbursts. Yeah, so I want to really normalize that too. That it's not going to feel like this very pretty. We're just kind of moving through these things. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that. And yeah, so kind of, when we talk about that process of grief, right, it's knowing that there is like recovery, or there is a sense of like you can work through what you don't have to be stuck, right? You don't have to be stuck in your emotions. There is this process that you can work through. And and recovery really means completing those feelings so that they don't get stuck within you, that they are released, and that you can move through that and grow. I mean, that is, um, the ultimate hope with going through that process of understanding and living through, what that diagnosis really means. I'll give this resource too that I'll just show. It's called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And so it is more of like it's set up to be more of like a self-help book, but I think it's another good resource that kind of goes through some of what we covered today. And it walks you through what you can do so that, what you can do with the grief process. And I found it very helpful, and it's a resource that I give a lot of families too. So it's called the Grief Recovery Handbook. Yeah. And so, so I'll just kind of end on this note. So when, right. So you just saw my experience that we're like going from one place to the next, and it's kind of everywhere. And so, the biggest tip and tool that I try to offer families does always go back to self-care. And so, really, that is probably the best support you can offer yourself as you are experiencing that process of grief for all of these different emotions. It often goes back to how to care well for yourself during this. And so, again, just reminding yourself that self-care also is very unique to what you're needing in that moment. Sometimes it can be rest. Sometimes it could be more of connection. But again, reminding yourself of like, if you've gotten this diagnosis, it is so overwhelming. It is going to take a while to process that through. So what supports can you put in place to help as you're processing through that? And that's where self-care can be so crucial in really helping to support you during this time.
Definitely. I know that I struggle with the self-care. I think I've said before, there are days I'll say I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm at the bottom. I'm not even, there are days I don't even consider myself on it anymore, just because I'm caring for my two boys with autism, my neurotypical son, my husband, family, friends, other families I'm serving through my work, my job with Low Country Autism Foundation. So there are days I feel like I don't even exist. I'm so giving, but I do recognize now it is so important in order to continue to take care of these special children that we have, that we have to take care of ourselves, or we're not going to be around or be able to care for them. So that's why the self-care is so important. So definitely, I mean, thank you for bringing that up, because that is, people preach it, that yes, self-care, 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 but as a caregiver to two kids with high needs, it is always, yeah, okay, yeah, well, yeah, it'd be nice to do self-care, but when's that going to happen? You know, but like you said, it might just be rest, making sure you're trying to get to bed on time, or giving yourself, somehow working it out, a schedule to where you are finding 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night. Simple things like that. But definitely yoga, I need to start yoga again. I was in a good habit of it, but I've let that go. But that is wonderful. And I think you can speak to that as far as yoga, anxiety, stress, self-care, and how that can help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I really quickly wanted to speak to the importance of like community care too. Is that, you know, sometimes when we think of self-care, we feel like it's, again, all on you as a caregiver, that it's like up to you to figure out how to care for yourself, which is another thing to do, right? And that can be so overwhelming. And so I do think that I think it's also very important to speak to like the importance of community care, and that, I do think that there's a responsibility for people to also step up to help you as well, so that you have that support. And that is so crucial. So I definitely agree that it's not all on you to then care for, yourself, when absolutely there is care and support that you need as well, that, where a community can also hopefully embrace that and step up to that too. But yes, yes. So speaking of, for sure, I think sometimes when we think about self-care, like I said, especially in, I think, our Western culture, it is so tied with like external things. So whether that means, going out and getting a massage, or like going out and doing things. And sure, that could be a piece of self-care, especially if that feels very meaningful to you. However, I do think that there is this larger concept of self-care, which has to do more with like, what are you needing in this moment, and how can you get that need met? And embracing that. And so, yes, sometimes that might mean acknowledging that I am so tired right now and I could use some rest. I was reading this other resource that was talking to you about like different types of rest, and speaking to like, sometimes we need social rest. And so social rest means like talking to your best friend on the phone about like something that is so, just like not relevant, just is going to make you laugh. Like that's a type of rest too. It's like when your body and mind can feel like, okay, I could just breathe right now. That is what rest is. So absolutely, there's a physical rest where you're actually sleeping, but then there's a social rest. There's a spiritual rest where, you're connecting with either a pastor and talking about something that is spiritually meaning for you, or you're praying. Like all of those, again, going back to this, like, it's when you feel like you can just breathe a little bit easier, even if it's just for a moment. And so, so I think yoga is one of the strategies that I have used as a resource to help to guide people in understanding, right, those different types of rest, and understanding, I think, the bigger question, which is like, how do you know what you need? And how do you like listen to those needs? Because that communication within ourselves can be really challenging as well. And so that is where I think yoga can help in teaching that skill of how to really listen inward on like, what do you need right now, and how do you get those needs met? And so, yeah, so I just finished, this is our last week of doing a 5-week course on yoga for anxiety. And then in 2 weeks, October 23rd, I'll be running another course called Yoga for Deep Self-Care. And specifically, it's 5 weeks as well. And this is reaching out specifically to caregivers to help to talk about exactly what we're talking about today. What does deep self-care look like? And the visual that I kind of use is, like when a baby is born, it almost comes very naturally for us to like give everything towards this baby, right? We're just like so in awe of it. It's so natural to want to provide and protect and do everything for that baby. And somewhere along the lines, we get this idea that we need to, that we start moving away from that type of care. And then we become adults, and it's like we forget about that deep care and how to do that and what that feels like. And so that's what this course is really going to be like, is how to teach us how to do that type of deep care for ourselves, especially when we emotionally need it. Yeah,
Definitely. Could we, can I get the link to that? And I could post, if you have openings, I could post that in the comments for those caregivers who may be watching right now, if they wanted to join that. Because I'm going to list in the comments, guys, the book that Leslie spoke about. If I could also maybe get the grief cycle, I could get a picture of that in the comments, and then a link to or for more information about the yoga for deep self-care that's coming up. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an offering to the community, I wanted to just also allow that. So it's $150 for the 5-week course. It's online Saturdays from 9 to 10:30. So if you can't make it, it's going to be recorded, and I send the link out afterwards. But if you do want live, you'll also get that community connection as well. And then for this community, I specifically wanted to offer 3 free ones. So for anyone who is interested, please like comment, and I'm going to put all of the names into, like a little raffle. And then the 3 names that I raffle will get the course for free. And then if you're not one of the 3, I'll still offer a discount of $100 for those 5 classes.
Oh, that is so kind. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's amazing. Okay, guys, well, you heard her. She's going to raffle off 3 free courses. So definitely, if you guys are interested, put your name down in the comments, and Leslie will raffle off, and will notify you if you won or not. And you don't have to live in South Carolina to benefit from this. That's you guys, This is all virtual. So definitely I would do this. I think I am going to be participating in this for some deep self-care. But Leslie, thank you. You are just, I'm so grateful to have you as a part of our community, and you are just so amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And guys, if you have any questions, again, please comment, and we will get those answered for you. But this was amazing. Thank you so much. And we will see everyone next month. Take care, guys. Bye-bye, Leslie. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.